Tonight's episode is brought to you by Cryptid Crate, the first and only monthly box subscription service for fans of cryptozoology and the paranormal. Visit cryptidcrate.com to order your first crate today. Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I'm your guide, Derek Hayes. Come on in. At least it's a bit warmer in here. We're getting hammered with snow yet again. I think we got close to 7 or 8 inches last night and there's more falling currently. We certainly asked for the rain last year, but this year it's too much too soon, I guess. I have a great show lined up for you guys this evening, but before we get started, I need to mention a comment I made last week. Now, it seemed like a lot of people didn't have an issue with this, but I did get a couple emails here and there, so I just wanted to point out that I said something along the lines of 99% of the paranormal field is not real. It's kind of just a number I pulled out of a hat that wasn't exactly based on any information. I was kind of going for the more dramatic effect than anything. If I were pinned to the wall and had to say, I would say it'd be closer to maybe 70% of all paranormal things are misidentifications, hoaxes, that kind of thing. And then you have the other 30% that can be something more, something scarier, something spooky. So I certainly didn't mean to discourage anyone, and I certainly was not implying that 99% of the calls on this show are fake. That is absolutely not what I was trying to get across. So if you were one of the ones that was a bit put off by the comment, just know that it was taken a bit out of context, and so we're going to move on from there. As I said, I have an excellent show, so let's quit wasting time and get right into it. The first call of the evening comes to us from one of our neighbors to the north. The following is Scott's call from Canada.
Hi, my name is Scott. I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia. I have a story from a neighbor of mine who doesn't live in the apartment complex anymore, but she was actually from Slovakia and ended up moving back to Slovakia, but we were friends for quite a few years. A really lovely person. She was probably in her early 50s, and got to know her. She lived right across the hallway from me, and she's a really lovely person, as I mentioned, quite spiritual. I was going through some tough times. My mom had recently passed away, and she was there to kind of console me, talk about it. But we kind of got on the subject about spirituality and different energies and whatnot. She was quite a spiritual person, easy to talk to, and I was expressing some feelings I was going through with my mom's passing. She was also describing certain scenarios and events that she had witnessed or gone through. She described herself as being able to pick up certain energies from people, good and bad, auras, whatnot, and I was quite fascinated by this whole subject. One night she came over and we were enjoying a bottle of wine. Nothing too crazy, we weren't getting drunk or anything, but just, catching up, having some conversation. And again, we kind of were talking about different energies and whatnot and people. And I said, well, tell me, what's the craziest thing that's ever happened to you? And she said, well, I was traveling on a bus coming into Vancouver and from the suburbs. And she said she was sitting at the back of the bus. The bus was full. There was quite a few people around in the back area. And she said that, there was all of a sudden, for some reason, there was a bad energy she felt, really kind of an evilness had come over her. She I think she described a bit of a headache or something, and didn't really know what was going on. She was reading her book at the time, so she was looking down, and she decided to, kind of see what was going on around her, because this horrible kind of, all of a sudden, this coldness, darkness, energy was all around her, or was being channeled towards her, as she described it. She ended up kind of looking up and scanning around the bus, and about 5 people down across from her, there was what she described as a tall, kind of gangly, or it was a teenager wearing a hoodie sweatshirt. The hoodie was pulled over his head, and he was looking down as well. So for some reason, she zoomed in on this individual. And right when this was happening, she's looking at this person, or whatever it was, the person slowly started to lift their head and looked directly at her. To her horror, this person, or whatever it was, had basically completely black, shiny glass eyes, as she described them, almost like looking at 2 dark black swimming pools, and just kind of a gaunt, pale expression. And as they looked at each other, this thing also kind of opened its mouth and made this sound like almost like a hissing cat. And she said it just scared the living hell out of her. She completely turned away, as you would. The blood felt like it was draining out of her body, goosebumps all over her. Immediately grabbed the chain to get off the bus, or press the stop button. And the bus, at the next stop, she got off as quickly as she could, as you would, right? So she's walking home, trying to get on actually the next bus, and to make her way home. So she got on the next bus, and everything was fine. Then when she eventually got to her destination in the West End, she's walking home, and about 2 blocks from her house, she gets up to the stop sign to cross the road, and she's looking ahead in the distance, and probably about 1.5 blocks down, she sees what she describes as the exact same person or thing sitting there, or standing on the corner with its hands down at its side, kind of flicking its hands outward, and just looking at her, and she just is mortified. So she turns and absolutely sprints back to her apartment, gets in, and I'm sitting there, oh wow, this is intense. So I'm asking her, well, first off, when you're on the bus, does no one else see this person, or are they not picking up any of this? She said, no, absolutely not. Everybody just seemed to be getting on with their business, and she doesn't understand to this day why it was, interacting with her, or how she felt that energy. So, I mean, that was just, and she didn't have any more experiences with it. So I thought that was just completely creepy. I get chills just thinking about it. Second part of this is kind of interesting, is around Halloween. Each year they kind of, in the local media, they'll play around and release some creepy things that have happened around Vancouver. Just this Halloween in 2018 here, they described an event that happened May 25th, 2004. Happened around 1 p.m. There was a bus that was traveling out to the suburbs again or whatnot. It was in downtown Vancouver. As one of the witnesses on the bus described, there was an individual who walked to the front of the bus, and he was getting ready to disembark. And he said to the bus driver, "How's your day going?" And the bus driver said, "Oh, it's good." And the man responded, "It won't be for long." And then they described, as the bus continued along the route, the driver began to feel extremely nauseated and later vomited after traveling a few kilometers from where the man actually left the bus, who said this to him. So the bus driver asked anybody else on the bus if they felt ill, and a few passengers said yes. So the driver, fearing a chemical attack, pulled over parked the bus and radioed for paramedics. So as the two responding paramedics began to treat the driver and hear his version of what happened, they too actually fell ill. And then others arriving on the scene actually felt sick as well. So there was this huge investigation, obviously, and very controversial. People, they never really identified what the source of this illness was. The official report that came out said that it was actually due to, I believe, methyl chloride poisoning or whatnot. But upon further review, the Vancouver Chief Medical Health Officer maintained that it was actually caused by mass anxiety, or MPI, which stems from a psychosomatic experience where powerful anxiety causes adverse physical consequences. So, I mean, that was a really weird and bizarre story. But when I was looking or hearing about this event that happened in 2004 happened on the 98 Beeline bus, which actually isn't in service anymore, but it used to travel back and forth from Richmond to Vancouver. And the crazy thing is that I asked my neighbor, after she told me this entity story, I said, well, what bus was this? Because I'm sure as hell not getting on this bus. And she said, oh, it was the 98 Beeline when I was coming in from Richmond. So, of course, at the time when she told me this, she told me this a few years ago, I had no idea because I hadn't heard this story yet that I just heard in October of this year. But I tell you, like, I don't know if they're related or not, but I just find it very, very creepy, both stories. So anyways, love the podcast and thought you might enjoy that story. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you, Scott, for submitting. And my first thought here, as I'm listening to this story, is that maybe this woman simply ran into somebody that was into body modification. You know, like gauges or those weird horn things that people put on their foreheads, or perhaps a facial tattoo, or even black contact lenses, which I happen to know you can purchase online for around $50. I would also like to think that somebody that would take the time and money to alter their body to look this way would probably have some fun with it. If I saw somebody staring at me and I looked that way, I'd probably try to scare them as well. But of course, that does not explain how this figure managed to get ahead of this woman. But the part I'd like to focus on the most here is the second half of the call, the apparent gas attack on the bus. Well, that portion of the call reminds me of a famous and mysterious gas attack from the small town of Mattoon, Illinois. The following blurb was taken from a Mysterious Universe article written by good friend of the show, Rob Morphy. The oft-told tale of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, also known as the Mad Anesthetic, began aptly enough in the small town of Mattoon, Illinois in 1944, between the dates of August 31st and September 13th. A thin, black-clad assailant would spread a reign of terror with a series of unprovoked and invasive quote-unquote gas attacks. Although police and FBI agents attempted to dismiss the whole thing as a classic case of mass hysteria, the evidence supports the reality that during those weeks in 1944, an unidentified person or persons managed to infiltrate the homes of local citizens with an unknown gaseous substance, which rendered, through means as yet unidentified, the occupants incapacitated or violently ill. Now, if this is something you'd like to look into more, let me suggest Blurry Photos. Back when Dave was joining David, they actually put together a Mad Gasser of Mattoon episode, and it was very informative and entertaining. So if you get a chance, look for that. Of course, I'm not claiming that what Scott's friend saw was the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, but I thought it was a bit unusual that the same kind of scenario would play out in two separate places, decades apart. Perhaps there is some sort of correlation, but it's likely that we'll never know. Thank you again, Scott, for taking the time to share this call. Our next call of the evening is that of the ghostly variety. The following is Maya's call from Parts Unknown.
Hi there, my name is Maya, and my story might be a little jumpy because we have a lot of experiences and many occurrences. So the home my sister and I grew up in is haunted. I don't mean haunted as in, oh, this got moved, weird, kind of haunted. I mean haunted as in heavy footsteps going up our stairs throughout the day, like a heavy boot, objects falling off the wall, things being thrown, tall shadows being seen, including in a hallway and in a specific room that terrifies us all the time. My sister, in the same room that we have seen these shadows, has been lifted off her bed, and she woke up as she fell back down. We have cats that will be like passed out, and then they'll wake up and stare at like a specific place in the room. We used to have a dog who would run over to our basement door and growl with the hair on the nape of his neck standing up. And no matter what we did, we could not get him to stop. And we eventually had to take him into a completely different room and lock him in there. We've heard knocking on the walls. My sisters, my brother-in-law, and I all woke up with scratches that were not cat scratches because, one, they were a lot different and went in a way that if you were asleep, a cat could not scratch you. And obviously you'd feel it if a cat scratched you in your sleep. But we'd wake up and there'd be like 3 scratches and they'd feel like they were on fire. So all of these experiences, our parents would not believe us. They'd be like, oh yeah, you're just not noticing your cat, even though they'd be downstairs and we'd hear stuff. But eventually we got them to believe us when my niece was in a high chair in our living room. It got lifted off the ground like an inch, and then it just went back down. And you should have seen our parents' faces because there was nobody near it. There's no explanation because I'm pretty sure a cat cannot lift a high chair. But now we never use that high chair again, and everybody now knows that my house is haunted. I have had friends that have experienced stuff with me and been like, is somebody here? And we all looked, nope. Is one of your cats upstairs? And all 3 of them will be passed out on the couch downstairs. So there's no one that's walking upstairs. But thank you for listening to my story, and I hope you can use it in one of your episodes. Bye.
Thank you, Maya, for one of the shows I've been shooting for. By the way, you can catch me every Wednesday night on Paranormal Caught on Camera on the Travel Channel. Sorry, had to do that shameless plug. But anyway, we were discussing scratches caused by suspected spirits. After looking at several examples, we began to notice that typically it comes in sets of 3. Now I wonder why that is. Some have suggested that the appearance of 3 scratch marks was done to mock the Holy Trinity, while others believe the scratches to be of demonic origin, hence the 3 claws. Now I'm not sure the reason, but Maya's mention of the 3 scratches made me think of that particular discussion. And Maya, it sounds like you should invest in a few cameras or perhaps a digital recorder. With a little luck, you can maybe capture some of this activity. Seems like there's so much going on there. Thank you again, Maya, for taking the time to share that story. Before we move on to our next call, I think it's important to play the following video by Top 5s on YouTube. I think it'd be a good idea to be familiar with the location before we hear this caller's call.
By the beginning of the 20th century, 450 Americans were dying of tuberculosis every day, and the wetlands around the Ohio River were the perfect breeding ground for the bacteria that caused the disease. There was no known cure, and victims would just waste away as they succumbed to their fever, chest pain, and coughing up of blood, their lungs being eaten from the inside out. In Jefferson County, Kentucky, this so-called white plague was reaching epidemic proportions, and it was thought that the cool, clean air of the mountains, together with a healthy diet and lots of sunshine, could help to cure this sickness. So Waverly Hills Sanatorium was opened. The Sanatorium was a huge 5-story Gothic structure able to accommodate 500 patients. To restrict the spread of tuberculosis, everyone at Waverly was isolated from the outside world. Not just patients, but the doctors, nurses, and employees too. Waverly had its own water treatment facility, its own farm, 2 cinemas, a post office, and of course its own mass graveyard for the many unclaimed bodies. On top of a hill and surrounded by woods, it was a calm, safe place to stay and be nursed.
Now, with that information securely lodged in your noggin, the following story is Lauren's from the state of Kentucky.
Hi, my name is Lauren, and I am calling out of Louisville, Kentucky, and I was a actress at Waverly Hills for about 5 years during their haunted house seasons, and this is a story from my first year there. Now this one I can't really say if it was actually something or if it was a trick of the eye, but here's what happened. I was portraying a torture victim one year, and I was in a room by myself, and I was quote-unquote chained to the wall. Well, my room had a strobe light in it, and one night, it was probably about 11 o'clock, and we weren't really too busy at that point, and I was just standing there, and there was nobody else around or in my room, and I looked up in the doorway leading into my room, and I saw a pair of shoulders. Well, I waited a minute thinking that it was a group, and they never walked in. So I slipped out of my chains, and I went to the door to look, and by the time I got to the door, they were gone. And the guys that were in the rooms around me were all down the hall a little bit. So that was my first experience with seeing somebody in the doorway of my room at the haunted house. Like I said, I'm not sure if it was a trick of the light or if something was really there, but yeah, that was my initiation into the paranormal part of Waverly. So, like I said, I was an actress for their haunted house for about 5 years. And the cool part about working up at Waverly Hills at their haunted house is that you get 2 forms of payment. You can either take cash money, or you can wait until the end of the season, and they will give you 10 overnight passes for an 8-hour investigation for free. And they are usually $100 a pop, so you're getting a $1,000 pass to run around Waverly Hills at night. So that's what I did for the 5 years that I had worked there. And this is right after my first season there, after I saw the strobe light man in my room. It was about December. Yeah, it was in December, and it was really cold. And plus, Waverly is a complete concrete structure, so it was extremely cold on the inside. So it was about 7 o'clock. That's when the tours usually start. And before they let you loose in the entire building, a security guard will take you through and will show you where the most activity has ever been in the building. Well, we had gotten to the 5th floor, which is a partial 5th floor. Or no, it was the 4th floor. I'm sorry, 4th floor, where they had the operating rooms at. And we were standing in the operating room, and they were telling us about all the different procedures that they would do on the tuberculosis patients. And while he was telling us this story, I was standing back against the wall, and I had a friend that I am no longer friends with anymore about 10 feet in front of me. And while he's telling his story, she reaches back behind her and starts batting something away, like something was going on with her coat or something. Well, she turns around to look at me to see if it was me, and her eyes get really big. And she walks back to me and whispers if I had just tugged on her coat. And I said, no, I've been standing here the entire time. And she had said that she felt somebody come up and tug on the back of her coat and blow in the back of her hair while the security guard was talking. Needless to say, she was pretty much glued to me the rest of the night, and just made for a really good, I don't know, that was just probably one of my favorite stories. And like I said, I have about 5 years worth of Waverly Hills stories, and I would love to sit here and tell them all, but that would take an entire episode. Thank you, and I will see you all again sometime. Bye.
Thank you, Lauren, for those stories. Now, I think it's safe to assume that this place probably has a ghost or two rambling around in those hallways, if that's something you believe in. Now, Lauren, I'm excited to hear about your other stories regarding this infamously haunted structure. I know countless TV shows have explored this legendary place, and very few of them have left disappointed. Thank you again for sharing your story. Now, before we move on to our next call of the evening, I need to thank everyone that's donated since we started the new campaign to raise money for the new studio space. So this is going to take a minute, but I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. But please don't let the speed that I go through this translate into the amount of thankfulness that I have. I am truly, truly thankful for each and every one of these donators. So without further ado, the following list is Kristen A., Carla M., Carol G., Derek H., Moses O., Gwyneth B., Stephen R., Edward S., Carlos T., Mary S., Jessica G., Andrea I., Ryan H., Andrew F., Tom C., Ariel P., Teresa Z., Angela W., Christopher B., Shayna S., Joey S., Jordan S., Julie Y., Timothy P., Daniel L., Sarah D., Raymond W., Lindsay P., Sean P., Joshua C., I'm almost done, Stephen G., Andrew H., Tony G., Rebecca A., Desiree L., Matthew K., Lauren M., David Z., Tyler A., Jason R., Anna G., Andy W., Amy B., Gordon H., and finally, Drew M. One last time, I want to take a quick second to thank each and every one of you. Some of you donated $100, some of you donated $5. But let me tell you, no matter the amount, it definitely helped achieve the goal that we all strived for. And now we have this beautiful new studio space that is very inspiring and allows me to work more fluidly and more artistically, believe it or not. So going forward, the show is going to be better thanks to these fine people. So thank you once again. And let's get back to the stories. Our next tale of the evening takes us to the state of Illinois. Look up, because this is a UFO call. The following is McKenna's story.
So my name's McKenna. I'm from Midwest Illinois, and my mom started listening to you guys' podcast, so I started listening too. And part of the reason I started listening is because I was hoping that I would come across a story like what I encountered, because to this day, I still have absolutely no idea what the deal was, what I saw, and I was just hoping that maybe someone out there could hear this and say, oh, this is what it was, or I'm not really sure. But, okay, so it was the beginning of last winter, and my parents live out in the middle of nowhere, flat countryside, no trees around or anything, and I was driving to their house, and it was late at night. I'd say probably 1 to 2 in the morning, actually. I don't remember the date, sorry. But there was no snow on the ground, and there was no precipitation or anything. I find that important, and I'll detail why in a second. And there's the end of the road, from the road that they live on, there's a stop sign. And so I'm driving in my truck, and I get to the stop sign, and I'm listening to music, as I often do as I'm driving. And when you're multitasking, like listening to music and driving and stuff, sometimes it takes you a while to register things. And I'd say about 50 foot before I got to the stop sign, in the sky, about maybe 20, 30 foot up, there was just this orby light. It's really hard to describe, because it's hard to describe something that you've never actually seen anything to compare it to. But the best thing I can say is it was like a hazy, orby light, and there wasn't seeming to be light coming from any direction. It wasn't like a flashlight or a headlight or anything like that. It honestly looked like maybe a very, very light aurora borealis. And it was in an area that I would say is about 30 foot around, I guess. I'm bad at estimating. But it was just an area in the sky that was so light and shimmery, And so I kind of turned my music down, and I slowed down to stop. And once again, I wasn't really registering it, so I'm kind of still driving. Like, I don't think I ever actually stopped at the stop sign. Sorry, police department. But I just slowed way down to a crawl. And what it looked like, honest to God, it looked like a long, eelish snake, but it wasn't opaque. It was all just intense light. And it looked like it was twisting, just hovering there up in the air. And it was large. And I thought, well, maybe it's the reflection of something on something. So as I'm still slowly driving and slowly trying to calculate what is going on here, there wasn't any snow to reflect on. There wasn't any precipitation. My vehicle's dark, and there's nothing ahead of me. It's just a stop sign in the middle of nowhere. And it was so odd, and I didn't feel freaked out. I just felt in a maze and completely astounded. But it was just this long snake, as I said, eelish thing, twisting around up in the sky, shimmering in light. And I went home and told my parents, and I'm sure they probably thought that I was on something. I don't know. But to this day, I have no idea what that was. Just up in the air, just floating there, a very light section of sky, very glowy, with something inside of it that looked like it was twisting around in there, and almost like it was swimming around in that area. And it was just the strangest thing, and I've never seen anything like that. There's nothing I can compare it to, so I'm sure that description probably is like the worst, but just trying to piece it together. And to this day, I still wonder, and I find it important to mention that strip of road right there, my mom had a very chilling experience. My mom doesn't get scared about anything, really. And my sister said that as we were driving, she saw a dark figure that she assumed to be a man wearing all dark clothes just walk into the corn. Now, those experiences were at different times of the season, on different years, but I do think that's interesting, and we didn't even realize that until we pieced it together the other day. But I was just wondering if maybe anybody had seen anything like that, or if there's just a logical explanation I haven't thought of. But it was just the most surreal thing, and I remember just being in awe and just having this overwhelming sense of what in the world, and I just have no idea what it could possibly be. And I know I saw it. I wasn't driving sleepy. I wasn't driving compromised by any chemical substances. It was just me listening to music, seeing this crazy thing that I can't describe. So that's all. It's pretty anticlimactic. But I just didn't know. Just thought it'd be worth sharing in case somebody else had a similar circumstance and is also wondering if it's just their imagination somehow. But thank you.
Thank you, McKenna. Now, two things come to mind after hearing McKenna's story. I wondered if the aurora borealis could be seen as far south as Illinois, so I did some digging. The following blurb from an article on Patch.com titled, "Northern Lights May Be Visible in Illinois Wednesday Night," which was published September 6, 2017, might shed some light on the subject. A solar flare earlier this week could produce one of nature's most spectacular shows, the Northern Lights, over northern United States Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Auroras may be visible from Washington State to New England and possibly as far south as Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, and Iowa. That is according to a map from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Space Weather Prediction Center. Now, I will admit I have never seen the Northern Lights, and I didn't witness what McKenna saw that evening, but it does seem like a logical explanation. Now, the second thing it made me think of was a call from Season 4, Episode 14, where Will describes something similar up in Canada.
Hey there, my name's Will, and I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I had a weird experience. Me and my brother and a couple friends were going to go watch the Perseids meteor shower. And as we were about to go load up the truck, I noticed vertically undulating snake that was see-through. think you could see the sky behind it, the stars. It wasn't very high at all, like maybe twice the height of the trees. All four of us saw it. Don't know how to explain it, don't know what it was. Thought it was really strange and wondering if maybe there's anything else like that out there.
So, apparently, McKenna, you're not alone. Now, of course, I don't believe we've come any closer to solving the mystery, but at least there's a bit of comfort in knowing that you're not alone. Thank you again, McKenna, for taking the time to share that story. Our next call of the evening takes us to my old stomping grounds of Los Angeles. The following is Willem's call.
Yes, hello. What's up, Monsters Among Us crew and listeners, and of course, everyone's favorite host, Derek Hayes. Just want to call in with another story here. The more I listen to the podcast, the more it brings back random occurrences that you don't realize, and I hear a lot of people saying that, and so what you're doing with this podcast might be bigger than you even know. But I want to tell a story. My name is Willem. I'm from Los Angeles, California. This story is when I'm about 13 years old. It's a short story. I'm on the 101 freeway with a friend and his mother, and we're going to his house after school. I'm in the back seat. I believe my friend is in the front seat, sitting passenger next to his mother. I look over to my right and see a man, it was clearly a male, driving a white, can't remember the make and model or anything right now. It was a small, compact car, white, pretty plain, nothing fancy. And his skin was entirely black. And when I say black, I don't mean, brown or dark. It was, as if he had painted black all over his body. And I mean his face, his hands were the only things I could see as he's driving a car. I don't believe he had a passenger with him. And obviously I see this guy, and he looks like he has a Kentucky Fried Chicken old Southern white suit on, like the Colonel wears. And he's driving this Civic-like-esque plain white car on the 101 freeway. He's right next to me. I'm on the passenger side of an SUV sitting in the rear seat. And so he's as close as anybody can be if you're in two different cars. So I had a clear visual of him, and it didn't look like paint on his face, but it was evident that his face was black. His hands were black. And the strangest part, I guess, was that he appeared white. He had white features, and I say white as in Caucasian. He looked like the features of a white man, like with almost like Wayne Newton hair. A big kind of poofy black, almost wig-like looking, and he had sunglasses on. And I immediately was like, what? And I tapped my friend in the front seat and obviously notify him, like, look at this guy. What's up with his skin? And my friend we just start cracking up and kind of make jokes about it. I've always wondered if there's someone else that's seen a black-skinned person with white person features. I've heard of blue people and lots of things like that. And maybe his skin was so dark blue that it appeared black. This was in the daytime right after school, going back to his house. So, I've never seen anything like that ever again. To this day, I always wondered what that was that I saw. Was it someone that just painted themselves? I'd love to hear your take on it, Derek. And love the podcast. Listening all the time. It's great what you guys are doing. Rock on.
Thank you, Willem. I have a bit of a theory here. Hear me out. I wonder if it was around Halloween time that this took place, and perhaps the guy was simply wearing a tasteless costume. Now, being Los Angeles, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of professional makeup artists, and I've seen some of their work firsthand, and I can tell you, it's downright amazing. But if this sighting did not take place on or around the holiday of Halloween, that might just make it difficult for this explanation to hold any water. Now, I did a quick search to see if any others have reported the phenomenon, since I myself had never heard of it. To be honest, I wasn't surprised to find nothing. but that doesn't mean that nothing is out there. So here's where I call on you, listeners. If any of you have experienced anything similar to what Willem described, give me a call. And again, that number is 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. Or you can shoot me an email at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com. This is a weird little call, Willem. I'm not real sure what was going on here, but it certainly sounded like a freaky encounter. Thank you for taking the time to submit it. Now, before I launch into the final call of the evening, I have a few very brief announcements. As I mentioned last week, we have brand new t-shirts in the shop. These are basically the logo of the show on a black heather tee. They look pretty awesome. So hit up the shop tab on the website, which is monstersamonguspodcast.com, and pick up yours today. I have a new Patreon episode dropping as soon as Saturday, so keep your eyes open for that, and this is actually exploring the encounter that got me into cryptozoology. So if that's something you're interested in, you have a day or so to get your affairs in order and get to be part of Patreon. And to do that, just simply go to patreon.com and search for Monsters Among Us podcast. And lastly, I don't say it enough, but I want to thank all three of my wonderful, wonderful volunteers, Addie Lloyd, Warren Pon Abbott, and Tony Bell. Without the help of these guys, I would have lost my mind months ago. So I just wanted to take a quick second and tell them how grateful I am for the time that they volunteer and for how much they put up with my craziness and unorganization. Thanks, guys. And on that note, I have a crazy story next for you guys. I could sit here and talk about this all day, but instead I'm going to give you the story straight from the horse's mouth. The following story is Scott's from jolly old England.
Hi Derek, this is Scott from the UK. I've been listening for a little while now, about 10 months or so, and I generally listen to the show whilst I am driving. I do about 1,500 miles a month, and so I'm usually behind the wheel, and podcasts help me pass the time. And it's just a really interesting show, and it's full of like-minded people sharing their experiences. So I thought I would share one of mine. I say one of mine because I've had a good deal of sort of strange interactions and experiences, but the first one that I will share with you and the listeners comes from my childhood. I was about 7 years old. I was growing up in Scarborough, which is a coastal town on the east coast of Yorkshire here in the UK, and essentially, it goes as such. I was 7 years old. I woke up in the night. It wasn't particularly late. I think it was probably around about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. My parents were downstairs watching TV, and at the time we lived in a 2 up, 2 down, as we call them over here in the UK. We generally have smaller houses than you guys do across the pond. So it had a living room, kitchen downstairs, and then 2 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs. So not a big place at all. But my bedroom was sort of up the stairs on the end of the landing, and I used to sleep with my bedroom door open a little. It was just always ajar for airflow and to keep the room cool. And the landing light was always on. So there was always a beam of light falling into my room and going actually across my bed, which comes into play later on in this encounter. So I wake up and I sense that something is not right by any means. Very, very weird atmosphere. And I feel something on the end of my bed, a weight on the end of my bed around my feet. I can feel it pressing down either side on the mattress, and I sit bolt upright and come essentially face to face with what I can only describe as being a gremlin. And when I say gremlin, I mean as in the 80s 90s movie Gremlins. But the thing is, this thing was probably around about 3 feet tall if it had stood up. This creature was not green and scaly, and the ears weren't quite as big and pointy and sticky out-y as those in the movie. I could tell that its skin was a sort of a rust colour and sort of looked leathery and dry, and this thing had a kind of sinewy look to it. You could see muscle tone there. And the reason I could see this was because of this shaft of light coming across my bed. Now, the weird thing was, I would have put this down to something like sleep paralysis or night terrors, but I wasn't frozen. I could move, I could make sounds, I could look around, and I was looking at this thing eye to eye, and it was moving up the bed. I could feel it moving very slowly towards me, and I could see it getting closer, and its eyes were not, they didn't glow brightly red. It wasn't as if there was some, like light bulbs in there. It wasn't really bright, but it was almost like the glowing embers that you find at a coal fire. If you've been to a bonfire and then it's gone out, and hours later you will see these faint red glowing points from where the coals are. It was like that. Anyway, so this thing is looking at me, I'm looking at it, I'm absolutely dumbstruck, I'm terrified, and I shriek. I let out the loudest scream I possibly could, and my parents are literally in the room below me, and so they absolutely belt up the stairs, full speed. They sprint up, and as they enter the room, my dad looks at this thing, it turns and looks at him, still now in this shaft of broken light where they're now standing in the doorway, but enough to be able to see it still. And my dad looks and he goes, "What the F is that?" And then it just jumps through the wall beside my bed into presumably the open air on the other side of this brick wall. Yeah, it's just, I speak about it now quite frankly and quite matter-of-factly, but, as a 7-year-old, it freaked me out, and I was terrified for weeks. It was just this terrible, weird experience with something that I still don't really fully understand, but I've seen a lot of strange things in my life. My family have always kind of attracted oddities and strange happenings, so in retrospect it was probably just a given, but yeah, it was a very, very odd experience. I remember it just as clearly now as if it was yesterday, and my mum and dad both saw it, so I can't even put it down to being a shared hallucination or something like that, because of me being, yes, I had been asleep, but they hadn't. They were downstairs watching television, and my dad had been working late, so he'd not been in that long. And yeah, it was just a very, very odd experience, and I know that the listeners have shared similar stories, so I just thought I would share that one as a starter. And anyway, so I hope it's been interesting. I hope the listeners have enjoyed it. I hope you've found it interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and thanks for a great show. Keep doing what you do, and hey, I'll keep listening, and I'll call back soon with another experience, I'm sure. Take it easy, and thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you, Scott. And I think Scott needs his own podcast. His voice is already perfect for one. Now, I have absolutely no explanation for what Scott saw other than a paranormal one. And it's not often that I get to say that. Possibly it was some sort of alien or spirit, or even an interdimensional being. Either way, whatever it was is a complete mystery. And the fact that the parents saw this thing certainly lends some credence to Scott's claim. And ironically, Scott's story lends some credence to someone else's story. If you remember back in mid-season 6, we received a call from John in Rhode Island, whom shared the following account about his gremlin experience.
Hello, Mr. Derek. This is John from Rhode Island. Lived in West Greenwich, Rhode Island, about 10 years old. I was a very nervous, very scared kid. I would basically kind of not sleep all night, wait for my dad to go to work in the morning. At which point I would grab a stuffed animal, jump in bed with my mom, and sleep for a couple hours before school started. But this particular morning, I was climbing under the covers, and I could feel that there was something in the room. And I knew exactly where it was. It wasn't like I just felt a presence. I felt that there was something in the left-hand corner of the room. I just knew it was there. And I just kind of flipped over on my back, and there, in the corner of the room, was what I can only describe to be a type of gremlin. It was the most bizarre thing, and to this day, I have never heard anyone talk about it on a podcast, and I've listened to every paranormal podcast there is possibly out there. It was about 3.5 feet tall. It had alligator-ish, iguana-ish skin, dark green, brown to the back, forming to green, yellow to the front, to a white pot belly. And this thing was fat. It had a pot belly. It had big, fat, chubby knees. It had like fat, chubby elbows. I mean, it was just a real fat, stocky, demon gremlin-looking thing, and it had a head the shape of a football, a sideways football, and it had ears like a pig. Like, it just kind of flanged out, and they were kind of flopped at the end, and it just stood there staring at me. And its head was, I mean, it had to be 1.5 feet long. Its head was almost as big as its body. I mean, half the size anyway. And it had a mouth, and it had lips, kind of like an iguana has lips, kind of undefined, but they're there. And its lips were parted ever so slightly to where you could see that it had tons and tons and tons and tons of very, very small, very, very sharp teeth. I did naturally what anybody would do, and I buried my head in the pillow. I was like, no way this thing is here. No way I just saw that. Absolutely not. And I buried my head in the pillow for about 10 seconds. I turned back around, Derek. It is still there. It's still there. Except this time, it looks at me, it smiles, it bares its sharp little teeth even more, pulls up its arm at its elbow, and it begins to open and close its hand like it's waving at me. I had the stuffed alligator, and I hauled off, and I just whipped it at this thing. And as I glanced away from this thing for like, I don't know, a 1/64th of a second, it disappeared, and the alligator just hit the wall.
Now, whatever these two saw, it certainly seems to be the same entity, if not a similar entity. And if you'd like to dive deep onto the subject of gremlins, might I suggest Astonishing Legends podcast. They recently released a special episode just on the gremlins, and in fact I believe it's their latest episode if you're current. So go check out Scott and Forrest. Those guys get pretty deep and pretty involved in each subject that they cover, so if you want to learn more, that's certainly the place to start. Thank you again, Scott, for sharing that amazing story. And that's going to do it for this episode. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Tony Bell, Warren Potabbott, and Addie Lloyd. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. And music for this episode was provided by Mayu and Coag Music. Thank you all for listening, and until next week. thanks for sticking around for the bonus content. I'm short on time tonight, so I only have one story to share with you. The following is Isaac's story from Canada. Hi, Derek. This story my mom tells often whenever the subject of the paranormal comes up, and I thought I'd share it here. Hopefully, you'll be able to use it in your show. For a little background, I'm the eldest of 3 kids. My siblings are 2 and 6 years younger than me, respectively. When I was about 3 or 4, my mother suffered a miscarriage before she had my youngest sibling. But obviously, my mom didn't tell me or my sibling about that right away. She and my dad had taken us with them to the hospital, and on the way home, while in the car, out of nowhere, I asked, "So, how's the baby, Mom?" Up to that point, she had said nothing about the miscarriage to us, and moreover, she hadn't yet worked out how to tell her 2 young children what miscarriage even meant. She said my abrupt question about it gave her chills, because according to her, it was as though I knew something was wrong, without her having to say so. My mom has also told us about this special bond that she and I have, although admittedly, I've never noticed it. Things she'll think, then I will say out loud a moment later, as though we were somehow telepathically linked, or something to that effect. It's possible that these instances are just coincidences, or maybe I read into the situation and felt the need to ask my mom about the baby, though I don't know any kid that young who would garner something from a situation like that. Thank you, Isaac. Well, thank you, Isaac. These synchronicities are certainly interesting. Just the other day I had my own, although not quite as poignant as the one you had. You see, I lost internet here in the studio because Apple doesn't want to connect to a 2.5 band, I suppose. I had some router issue that I don't fully grasp. So as a solution, instead of buying a new router, I thought, I'll go to the store and I'll buy a 50-foot Ethernet cable and plug it directly in, which I am happy to say finally worked. Today's the first day since I finished the studio that I've had the internet. So at any point, I was at Staples looking for an Ethernet cable, and a voice in my head said, "Go buy pens." And I'm thinking to myself, why do I need to buy pens? Like, I have a favorite pen. I've used it since my days working in the film industry. I've had the same brand of pen. And I'm actually down to, I believe, 2 of them. I have one upstairs and I have one downstairs. Well, I ignored the voice in my head that told me to go buy pens, because in my mind I didn't need them. Went home, went about my day. Well, I sat down yesterday to begin writing the show, pulled out my pen, and that's when I learned that it had exploded at some point. So there was ink everywhere, and the pen was rendered useless. Whatever or whoever that voice was, they were trying to tell me that I needed a pen, and I shouldn't have ignored them. I don't know what these things are, or even if they are in fact things, but it's certainly interesting the way that these coincidences seem to line up. Thank you again, Isaac, for taking the time to share your story, and thank you for sticking around to the end of the show. Have a good night.